Had even one of these promising players stuck around longer, the entire course of NBA history could have been vastly altered. Losing a special talent either in the middle of or before reaching their prime is gut-wrenching enough, and it leaves us wondering what could have been different. All we can say is, what if? Pistol Pete was the first coming of the new age shooting guards in the NBA during the 70s and 80s. His game was as sound as ever for a 6'5" prototypical 2-guard. All the razzle-dazzle we see from our favorite guards today, Maravich was the pioneer of so many of the playground moves and circus shots that excite fans today. But before he went on to compile a legendary pro resume in the NBA, Maravich played few of the greatest seasons ever produced by a college player. In a 3-year span from 1966 to 69, playing for Louisiana State, Maravich posted the greatest 3-year scoring stretch in NCAA history. Those 3 seasons are still the single greatest seasons ever. In those 3 years, Maravich's scoring outputs were 43.8 points per game in his sophomore season and 44.2 and 44.5 points per game in his junior and senior seasons. If that isn't remarkable enough, Maravich produced 50 or more points 10 times during his senior season. I mean, these are breathtaking numbers. In 1970, just before being drafted 3rd overall in the NBA draft, he took home College Player of the Year honors. Here's a synopsis of what exactly Maravich did in his legendary college career. First, he's the highest scoring college player ever with 3,667 career points. He has the highest scoring average at 44.2 points per game. He has the most career 50-point games and the most field goals made. And let me remind you that he did all this without a single three-pointer. The NCAA didn't institute the three-point line until the 1986 season, but if Pistol Pete had the opportunity to launch long-distance shots, there's no doubt in anyone's mind that he would have done even more inexplicably great things. After a few predictably great years with the Atlanta Hawks, Maravich was dealt in a trade to the then New Orleans Jazz. The Jazz were a desperate expansion team that needed a huge draw, an exciting playmaker, and a shotmaker. And who better to trade for than the great Pistol Pete himself? Maravich's first couple of seasons as a member of the Jazz weren't the greatest of his career, but after he bounced back from a few nagging injuries, the ex-LSU star was back at it in full force. In the 76 season, Maravich mustered his best season as a pro. He had a career-best 31 points per game and scored more than 40 points an incredible 13 times. He even had a 68-point game during that season. But those were effectively the last few moments of fame for the great Pistol Pete. He was by no means a bad player, nor was he really declining. What was evident, however, was his continued battle with lower body injuries that hampered Maravich after his first few very productive seasons. As Maravich got older and really was no longer able to play through injuries or recover from them in little time, he decided that it was time to face reality. While he wasn't quite ready to call it quits, he knew his career would continue to be bothered by injuries if he played a little while longer.
I know I could, if I really wanted to, I could probably play a few more years, but basketball has gotten very exhausting to me, and sometimes you feel like you've given all you can to basketball, and basketball's taking just about as much out of you as you can.
Maravich had a short stint with the Boston Celtics in the early 80s alongside a very young Larry Bird. And though Maravich showed flashes of the Pistol Pete of old during his short tenure with the powerhouse Celtics, he was only outputting a mere 11 points a night. That total dropped to a pedestrian 6 points per game during the Celtics' deep playoff run. But if people thought that Maravich would go out on quiet terms, they were wrong. Pistol Pete showed people the gunner he was by shooting a scorching 66% from three-point range in 1980 when the NBA introduced the three-point line. Although he only took 15, it just goes to show you the fantastic showmanship and savvy Pistol Pete possessed. He was truly one of the all-time greatest players the NBA has ever seen. Sadly, Pistol Pete never got the chance to carry on his great legacy off the court and become a mentor to some great two guards of the next generation. Maravich, at only 40 years of age, died of a sudden heart attack during a pickup game of basketball in 1988. Despite losing one of the game's legends too soon, he left a powerful blueprint for many great players that came after him. The death of Reggie Lewis left a wave of unprecedented grief in the entire world of sports. You might remember Lewis as the one player that collapsed on court during a game. Lewis had an interesting career in life leading up to his days playing with the Boston Celtics. He's remembered as one of the best players on one of the great, if not the greatest, high school teams ever. That team had 4 players that would go on to make the NBA, and he was arguably the best player on a high school team that didn't lose a single game in over 2 years. It was all destined for Lewis. It was all set up for him to enter the NBA and for him to quickly become one of the best young players in the NBA. But what makes Lewis's story even more fascinating is when you begin to discover the circumstances of Lewis's early life. He was born into poverty to a single mother, Peggy Lewis. Pega was challenged mentally and had a lifelong battle with drugs and overdose. And even while dealing with his mother and then eventually managing his married life with a child, Lewis was still playing at an incredible level on the court. He played so well that Boston fans were hopeful for competence from their team in the post-Larry Bird era. Lewis was embraced by fans of the Boston organization for being the successor to Bird, someone that would help to revitalize the dynastic culture of the Boston Celtics. It was looking that way for a good while. The Celtics remained a fun team to watch and a threat to becoming the next best team in the league for years to come, until one fateful day in 1993. Lewis was casually jogging up the court until he fell. He collapsed. The Celtics pulled him from the game and sent him to get checked out. According to the medical reports that Lewis received at the hospital that day, he discovered some terrifying news that would seriously put his career in jeopardy. Lewis was told that he had a deadly defect in his heart. He was diagnosed with focal cardiomyopathy, a fatal condition that attacks the heart and can greatly increase the risk of heart failure. Lewis was speechless, stunned. He didn't know what to say. Doctors told Lewis that his career was over. They told him that playing basketball again could end his life. And what do you do when you hear something like that? After getting second and third opinions, Lewis had a few doctors give him different information. Some doctors even gave Lewis assurance that he could return to the hardwood eventually if he stayed on medication. Uplifted by the news he heard from some specialists, Lewis decided to give it a go one day when he played a game at pickup with some friends. And just 5 minutes into the game, Lewis again collapsed on the floor. He was faint, dizzy, and lightheaded. And although he was able to be rushed to the hospital in a timely fashion, Lewis was sadly pronounced dead just hours later. He was only 27 years old. Just crushing news for the Celtics and Lewis's family. The Celtics were left in years of mediocrity following the tragic death of their emerging superstar sensation. Drazen Petrovic was getting ready to enter only his 5th season in the NBA when he passed at the age of 28 in 1993. And what made his death sting even more was that he was coming off his most productive season as a pro yet. He averaged better than 22 points per game, 52% from the field, and a Steph Curry-esque 45% from three-point range. He was turning into one of the greatest shooters of all time. Petrovic was a European sensation in the 80s when he played overseas. His aura and his everlasting mark as a European player helped him slowly become one of the household names in the NBA during the late 80s when he arrived into the early 90s. He became such a stunning player to watch that European fans clamored for the return of their hero back in Europe. Although Petrovic was a stunning player individually, putting up great numbers and giving the NBA a newfound dynamic of overseas players, Petrovic and the Nets weren't exactly winning games. This didn't sit well with Petrovic, who was regularly competing in large-scale games when he was in Europe. Frustrated with the Nets management, Petrovic made it clear that he would likely accept a 2-year offer to play pro basketball in Europe again. Petrovic became a fan favorite in the NBA. Fans tried making their pitch to Petrovic and tried convincing him to stay. Determined to go back home, Petrovic decided after the 1992 season that he would be leaving America. And once he got back to Europe, he was the same player European fans saw in the 80s and was just as electrifying as he was in his few seasons with the Nets. But on the day Petrovic was going to visit his girlfriend in Germany, he was killed when the vehicle he was in collided with a tracker trailer. He was only 28 years old and clearly only getting started in his legendary career. "We are a country of a million," Petrovic's brother told the New York Daily News. "Without him, basketball takes 3 steps back." This was a stunning loss for the world of basketball. Another Boston Celtic makes a list, and again, we can pose the question, what if? Bias is the only player on this list that never actually played a single minute in the NBA. He was drafted, but he never played. So, what happened? To put into perspective just how great a player Len Bias was, check the quote that was uttered years ago by former longtime Duke head coach Mike Krzyzewski. Coach K said, "This is my 24th year at Duke, and in that time, there have been 2 opposing players who have really stood out, Michael Jordan and Len Bias." He put Bias in the same breath as the greatest player to ever play in Michael Jordan. That's saying something. Bias was a standout phenom at the University of Maryland. Standing at 6 feet 8 inches tall, Bias had an incredibly sound game. He was so skilled and versatile that he was effective playing at any position. He could post up, he could handle, could pass, he would be the first to snag every rebound. Just a brute force of nature unlike the NCAA or the NBA had ever seen before. In fact, Bias was so good in college, the Celtics GM Red Auerbach had started making it known years before the 1986 draft that the Celtics would be drafting him. They even traded up to claim the 2nd overall pick 2 years before the draft just to be sure that they could land Bias. The first pick in that draft belonged to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Although they ended up drafting future Hall of Famer Brad Daughtry, the Cavs, too, expressed great interest in the former College Player of the Year. But the Celtics remained so desperate for Bias that it was reported that they spread false rumors around Bias to steer the Cavs away from taking him with the first pick. Somehow, someway, it worked. The Cavs passed up on him because of the false rumors Boston perpetuated about him. The Celtics got their wish and gracefully selected Len Bias with the second overall selection in the 1986 NBA draft.
The Boston Celtics select Len Bias of the University of Maryland.
The league was terrified. The Celtics, who at the time were coming off their third NBA championship in a 5-year span, just drafted the man most believed would be the consensus best player in the world at some point. Boston, of course, had the core of their dynasty intact with Bird, McHale, and Parrish. A week earlier, they hoisted the NBA trophy. Now, they added Bias to the fold? Good luck to the rest of the NBA. But what would go on to transpire in the coming 48 to 72 hours would send shockwaves throughout the sports world. It had been discovered that Bias spent numerous nights out leading up to the draft. During those nights, Bias had been consuming extreme amounts of cocaine. That cocaine overdose would end up claiming his life just days after he was drafted. This news stunned the entire NBA, but the situation helped enforce a much harsher policy on the drug use in the league. The NCAA also doubled down on the regulations regarding drug use. It was an astounding turn of events. What was supposed to be the virtually unbeatable four of Bird, McHale, Parrish, and Len all went awry with a snap of a finger. Losing Kobe Bryant wasn't just a time that hurt NBA fans. It was a moment the entire world was emotionally bruised. Kobe played 20 of the greatest years an athlete could ever put together. He won 5 titles, had all the scoring marks, produced a Hall of Fame level career in 2 different jersey numbers, and was only beginning to rival his greatness on the court with his cerebral off-the-court endeavors. In 2018, Kobe won the Best Animated Short Film when he was honored for the work he did producing Dear Basketball. That was just one of the first of many expected milestones we hope to see for years to come from the late great Kobe being Bryant. He was the epitome of work ethic and dedication on the basketball court, and he was only continuing that level of excellence off the basketball court. He was setting a new age precedent for creators today by transitioning his Mamba mentality from basketball brilliance to second-to-none work in the creative industry. Kobe and his daughter Gianna were tragically killed in a helicopter crash in early 2020. And Kobe put together and sustained 20 years of excellence in the NBA. Unlike the rest of the players on this list, his legacy as a business mogul and creator was growing into something uniquely special. He may be gone in presence, but the Mamba mentality and the legacy of the great Kobe Bryant will continue to inspire generations of athletes and creators forever. In the words of Kobe, Mamba out. The unique stories of these fantastic athletes help remind us how precious the lives of beloved athletes can be. Although the demise of each single player on this list has truly saddened passionate NBA fans throughout the years, the lessons we can conceive from their stories is a huge eye-opener for anyone. It's what makes not just basketball, but the entire world of sports so riveting and how it touches the lives of so many. So to everybody on this list, rest in paradise.